Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so grateful to you for being here tonight, and we're so grateful to Hunterdon Art Museum's funders who make our exhibitions, programs, and events possible. In particular, we'd like to thank the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, a partner agency of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation for their general operating support. Tonight, we're gathered together for an artist talk by Ann Clarke, whose exhibition, As Her Mind Collapsed, I Was Awakened, The Rugs of Ann Clarke, is up now through Sunday, June 13th. The 5 monumentally scaled rugs featured in this show deal with a particularly sensitive and personal subject: the artist's aging mother, who suffered from dementia and died at the age of 100 on December 1st, 2020. Several of the rugs depict her mother's age-worn hands and eyes. Up close, one can discern that these body parts are built from individual carpet fibers, that each tuft or thread of color seems like a cell of her mother's body, or a pixel of a parting photograph, or a detail of a last memory. It's a stunning exhibition installed in the 3rd floor gallery of the Hunterdon, and I encourage you to see the show now in its last week. This evening, we welcome Ann Clarke. Clarke is a fiber artist originally from Rochester, New York. She received her MFA from RISD and BFA from the University of Michigan. In 1998, Clarke joined Syracuse University's faculty in fiber arts and material studies. And in 2008, she became Dean of the College of Visual and Performing Arts there, though she's returned to the faculty as of 2016. So thank you, everyone, for being here, and I'm honored to turn it over to you, Ann.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm going to start. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. First, I would like to start by thanking the Hunterdon Museum of Art in Clinton, New Jersey, and the great team there: Jason Vardikar, Marjorie Nathanson, Ellen Mayer, Brian Kearney, and Terry Frazier. I will start by introducing you to my mother here in 1958, the year before I was born, with my father, Archie. Betty was born in 1920. This work is about time, aging, and empathy, and it is also about how it is made. My current work can be seen as being about the life around books, or the life of books themselves. Notes and sketches that become books as found in archives, notes taken from books, study notes, as well as meaningful artifacts left in books, most often having been used as a bookmark. I also source broader ideas of books, as found in reference materials, like handwritten lists, date books, timetables, and old newspapers. I work exclusively in textiles, which embody the history of the home and domestic space. Specifically, I'm making rugs now, quite simply that on which we stand. They also define a space one can be in. These constructs provide the frameworks around which each piece is built. This is Betty at 99 years old, 6 months before she passed away. For 8 years, I lived at an intersection where my present life met with caring for my aging mother, where all roads wound back through the past. The pieces incorporate images and text in layers. This work reflects how I processed my mother's aging. It was hard and complicated. Betty remained physically robust, but her mind was ravaged by dementia. For her, shifting shards of her life stuck and unstuck, folded and reformed, resulting in reconstructed narratives that both affirmed and challenged my understandings. The depth of the work coming from the dark parts, revealing how deeply entrenched fear and loathing can be, aspects of these qualities living beyond her ability to know if her children were even alive. With the luxury of personal battles with her having ended, hearing a century of experiences randomly revealed and concealed and revealed again, as her mind collapsed, I was awakened by how deeply my heritage is on the wrong side of history and indicted by my own privilege. I am finding my way in the work itself and often feel that I am dragging my heart forward. Oliver Sacks, who was a professor of neurology at NYU and an author, wrote in The River of Consciousness, memory can serve as a dynamic, transforming, reorganizing process throughout the course of one's life. Nothing is more central to the formation of identity than the power of memory. Nothing more guarantees one's continuity as an individual. In the last years, Betty lived in what I would call a kind of a fugue state. Periodically, there were clearings of sorts. Sometimes she would look up and say, "How long have I been gone?" This piece is titled Arrival and includes an image of Betty's hand, silverware, and poker notes. The reason for the title Arrival is that her larger-than-life hand is reminiscent of the heptapods in the movie by the same name, Arrival. The reason for the title sticking is that my experiences with Betty and how she experienced time, of how I experienced time and communication when with her, constantly reminded me of the movie, as well as the short story, Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, on which the movie was based. The movie and story play on the idea that the brain reshapes itself as new languages are learned. In the movie, the language of the alien heptapods loops in time. I backed into this particular connection. I did not start with this association. Scale is important to me in this work. It matters to me that the pieces are large. And particularly in this piece, the image is so much larger than life size. This piece measures about 7.5 by 7 feet. And I want to offer the viewer a shift in experience at whatever distance one is at. At the most intimate, close up, where the piece can be touched, the density of the textile and hand, as well as the subtle shifts resulting from yarn and material choices, become more evident. In this piece, one of the yarns used in the background is stainless steel combined with wool, which is the very light gray color you can see in this slide. The stainless steel lends a coldness to the piece, as well as an internal strength and stiffness. This is Mother and Child Day, installed at the Hunterdon Museum. It is about 9 feet by 7 feet, made of mixed wools, cottons, and silks. For the knitters who might be out there, I use wools from Brown Sheep Yarn Company in Mitchell, Nebraska, as well as merino wool from Jagger Spun Yarns in Maine. This is Mother and Child Day and Mother and Child Night. Pieces are often designated by time of day and done in pairs to reflect the perpetual nature of caregiving. These pieces are comprised of a cut-out paper silhouette of me done when I was a child in the center, and many layers of notes from books and family papers. I am both mother and child in these pieces. In this detail of Mother and Child Day, you can see the variation and gradations of colors in the piece. The color layout is in part taken from one of Pierre Bonnard's paintings of nude in the bath. This is a detail of the nighttime pairing to the piece in the show at the Hunterdon Museum. In Mother and Child Night, the colors are amplified to express the phenomenon of sundowning, where individuals with dementia often have a particularly difficult time as day transitions to night. This pairing is titled Time Notes Day and Time Notes Night. They are about the fraught politics of inheritance, my twin sister's eyes as witness, looking over an image of an early printout of computer data on time. The data output image is from the Turing archive. This detail of time notes day on the right shows how the image of the eyes are intentionally pixelated in contemporary terms, but also very much like printed newspapers of old. My father was born in 1908 and worked his entire life in the newspaper business, although his very first job was delivering ice. He started working as a newsboy when very young and ultimately retired from the very same Rochester newspaper as circulation manager when he was in his 70s. Growing up around stacks of newspapers, as well as visiting the press room as a child, continued to impact my work in subtle and overt ways. This image showing the up-close experience where, in large part, the structure of the knitted stitch disappears as a result of the process of washing the pieces. Yes, these are all knitted. The next pieces I will show you are to explain my process a little bit. And although these pieces are not in the show at the Hunterdon, the process is the same for the pieces in the show. The image on the left shows an iterative study for the piece looking back. In it, I can join a photograph of my son Jersey flying a kite as a boy and text from archive materials and notes found in books. I work in Photoshop on the computer and print out the composite images to further alter them through drawing and painting. I then re-photograph the results and put it back into Photoshop to work on some more. The image on the right is a finished looking back study in which colors reference Frau Angelico paintings. Frau Angelico is a painter from the early Renaissance, and I fell in love with one of his frescoes in the convent of San Marco while in Florence, Italy, many years ago. For this particular piece, simply titled Looking Back, in addition to making a piece that included text, I also decided to make one without. Enjoying the normative textile strategies of building in panels with color shifts over the span of each panel to depict the sky. This piece, titled Wonderland, is here shown at Novato Gallery in Jersey City, New Jersey, earlier this year. It is 5 panels wide, and this gives you a sense of the scale. The picture on the left is my knitting machine, on which all of this work is made. Knitted in panels, 2 of which are shown on the right. When knitted, the textile structure is quite open, much like the hand of a typical sweater. The panels are sewn together by hand and then washed in a home washing machine. When the piece goes into the washing machine for the first time, it can be almost twice the size of the finished piece. After the first washing, the floats are cut. The floats run along the back of the knitting. For those who knit, this is typical Farrell knitting, where the second color position is carried behind the textile. This part of the process can take days to complete. And apologies to non-knitters who have no idea what I'm talking about. After the floats are cut, the piece is washed and blocked on my studio floor, up to 10 times to shrink the textile to the dimension and density that I want. This is called fulling, which differentiates it from felting. Fulling is the shrinking of a textile that has an organized structure, weaving or knitting, where felting refers to bonding wool fibers together with heat and agitation without a base textile structure. Edges are hand crocheted once the piece is in its final size. Wonderland is about 6.5 by 10.5 feet. The details on the screen might be a more accurate representation of what it is to stand next to the piece. The clocks are bigger than my head. Betty always loved clocks and watches. She would arrange and rearrange daily her long, unworking, and unnecessary clocks. She also liked to play with small plastic animal toys. I've included an image of a lion toy she loved, as well as written notes from the mother of a friend of mine. Dot was also impacted by dementia, and you can tell through the writing how she is trying to remember, understand, and remind herself when her son will be leaving to go home. Here, I'm standing next to Love and Loathe to give you scale. This piece is, to give you the scale this piece is. And it uses the same image of my mother's hand as in Arrival. This piece is 12.5 feet by 7.5 feet. I struggled with caring for my mother. The colors in this piece reflect danger, street signage, and Kodak. I grew up in Rochester, New York, where my stepfather worked at Kodak. The title of the piece, Love and Loathe, is from a Catullus poem. Catullus was a Latin poet of the late Roman Republic, and although mostly recognized as a passionate love poem, it resonates for me as a caregiver. I hate and I love. Why do I do this? Perhaps you ask. I know not, but I feel it happening and I am tortured. This is an installation shot from an exhibition at the Schweinfurth Memorial Arts Center this past fall in Auburn, New York. I wanted to show you the scale of looking back, as well as its juxtaposition with the piece Hand from the exhibition at the Hunterdon Museum. I'm also sharing the pieces to the left, which I call tufted eye portals. They are domed and about 6 to 8 inches deep. This is a self-portrait. I maintain parallel practices in my studio, knitting and a kind of tufting. Concurrent with knitting rugs, I've been working on a series of portraits in the form of focusing on magnified eyes of individuals. They are reflective of the experience of having some people come back to life for my mother. So for me, it started to feel almost like a portal in a weird submarine where the lens of a window amplifies something familiar and unfamiliar. Each one is a large tufted close-up of an individual's eye, which seems to stare at the viewer as the piece hangs on the wall. Each brightly colored eye evokes a different age. Some look young, while others use different colors to resemble wrinkles. All of them extend outward from the wall like round pillows, giving depth to the artwork. Eye portals are a reflective look at the past, how it informs us of the present. The exaggerated scale of these eye portals, which dome and protrude from the wall, are like eyes in the past breaking through the wall, or one's past peering into our present as thoughts made manifest. This image of the self-portrait shows the curve and dimension of the pieces. The exaggerated convex size and shape of these eyes amplify ideas of seeing and being seen, seeing the seeing. Thank you. And here's a beautiful picture of the Hunterdon Museum. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne. That was wonderful. Thank you. I know if we were all together in person, there would be much applause. And one day, so soon, we will be able to do that. And,
right.
That will be a catharsis, won't it? Yes, I agree, Carla. Wow, it's really beautiful work. I was struck by it from Carla made a comment in the chat. I was struck by Anne's work from the moment that I saw it, even just on the screen, and even more so in person. I want to encourage everybody to please enter questions, comments in the chat. It can be technical questions. I had so many technical questions for Anne. I'm still learning some of the technical things. So we already have a technical question, and I'll kind of try to interweave in the conversation. So it can be any question, a question about her, Anne's process, about her show, whatever, we want to be in conversation. So before I ask my first question, I just want to say the takeaway for me in this is the power of art to process feelings and thoughts and experiences and trauma, both for the artist and for the viewer. That processing is not an easy thing to do. We're all on this planet, even if we live a really long time, like your mom to 100, we're all on this planet for a really short amount of time in the grand scheme of things. And encountering all of the texture of this world it's a lot. There's a lot to process. There's a lot of trauma. And I think one thing that your art does, for me at least, is it just shows the potential for processing that is possible. So I guess that's my first question. And is if maybe you could talk about that or comment on how these works may or may not be about, or processing the experience, of losing your mom. Of course you've talked about this, but if you could just talk more about that.
Yeah. So, I think that for me, doing the work was sustaining for me personally. There's a lot of, as you might imagine, it's kind of what I call road work in making these pieces. And there are great swaths of time where I really have to be present about making changes in colors. In each color position, there are 3 threads. And so it pulled me forward. And I have to say that my work has always pulled me forward in my life. I sort of think of it as kind of smarter than I am, which it's like what I'm engaged in, what I don't fully understand, So in the studio, I'm a seeker, and it's not that I'm trying to understand in my head. I'm really trying to holistically process. And there's something about the materials and the physical engagement and the complexity of planning and iterative chants, all of which kind of pulls me forward and was really supportive of me through these 8 years of caring for my mother. And also to kind of realize that because I'm a professional artist, there was that moment where I didn't know if I was making them for me or if I was going to put them out in the world. Right. So there's that sort of choice to put them out in the world, that the work isn't about, and this is that sort of challenge place of the processing where there are specific stories, but if I get too specific, then it becomes about me and not about broader implications. Like I want to keep the work open to viewers and to other people who can access the stories and get what they can from it. So, it'll be interesting to see, right now I'm in a holding pattern about what to do next, right? To have the work kind of call me forward again. So it's been intense, really intense. These things are huge. And my studio is on the 3rd floor. And it's almost sort of comical. My washing machine is in my basement. So I'm literally lugging wet textiles that weigh more than me 4 flights up and 4 flights down. So it's like the scale of the pieces, wet and dry, and the processing of the process was like literalizing the weight of what I was doing.
Yes. Not to be too literal, but heavy emotions. But I get that too. There's a lot of great scholarly literature out there, for example, about how textile fiber art is so much sort of fundamentally about emotion and affect that, fiber is such a fluid fiber art is such a fluid art, so organic, textile is pliable, fabric is pliable, just imagine carrying these heavy notes, these heavy rolled up carpet notes up your stairs. And it's true, installing your show, when I was there with people who are installing it, with me and with Marjorie, it was really, it is true. They were like these rolled carpets out there in the gallery space, and they're so physical and material, and they bend and move, and you have to touch them, and they have this kind of pliability that relates to how we carry emotions. That they weigh on us. They change. They're fluid. They're like our clothes in a way. I don't know. I'm kind of riffing with you, but yeah, there's something about the fluidity of these carpets and their material fluidity that makes them so affective. They drape a little bit on our gallery floor. There's something sort of, they're so impermanent. They're so contingent and in a way fragile or something. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So Peggy Tatum has a question. They comment, your work is overwhelming to experience, and I agree with that, Peggy. I love it too. What are you feeling as you create these pieces, or what are your feelings as you create these pieces? That's a great question.
Well, my feelings vary over the course of making a piece, right? Because they take 4 to 6 weeks to make, give or take, right? And so it's over a large span. And at the same time, and this has something to do with this sort of like how that the pieces carried me. They were like containers that sort of carried me forward, because they were the through line. There's the day-to-day of taking care of my life and going to work and my mother and the weight of all of that meant, and working on the pieces, which became, my studio has always been home base. It's always been the place around which I've built my life. But it really became home base. It really became a touchstone, so that I could get in my studio and be just, like, really upset or angry or confused, or from everything, very intense or super exhausted. But I'm just going to go up there and this goes to what you're talking about the sort of comfort of the work. I mean, these materials are soft and lovely, and the colors are rich. And so I could also use the studio time as a space of comfort and hope and moving forward. So it's a real range of emotions throughout the process of making the pieces.
Yeah, that's another thing about these works, is they're so their texture is so unique. I know it's remarkable to see them in this space and in person, because the fibers are so entangled that they have this the surface quality is really unique, and it's not what you would think of as a kind of rug that you would see or encounter in everyday experience. So it's special. One of the things I've been thinking about with your work. Oh, do we have more questions? Because I don't want to accidentally. Oh, okay. Yeah, great. So I have a thread, sorry, no pun intended. I have an idea that I'd like to talk to you about in a minute, but I'd like to get the audience questions first. So Carla asks, why do you work in such large scale? It looks so daunting, Carla says, but which is point taken. That's a good question. Why do you work in such a large scale? You made a point of that in your presentation. You're like, I really want to show you the scale of this.
So I think that, I mean, I haven't, this is the first body of work that I've done. I am not somebody who historically worked really large. And it's one of those things that when I look back on it, it's like, oh, of course I wanted to make them large. It all felt so overwhelming, right? That it's that sort of, the largeness. It wasn't, I didn't say, I'm going to make work about my mother and it needs to be big because this is so big and daunting. I didn't decide to do that. I found myself wanting to sort of challenge the capacity of my home studio, challenge the capacity of my washing machine was the way I went at it, was I want to challenge my use of images and I want to see how big I can make these. And then at the same time, I'm choosing images of my mother and dealing with her aging and that space. So, I mean, I reached my capacity for a home washing machine. And so there was a bit of kind of, it's like when people are training for a marathon or something, right? It's like, there was like this training component of feeling like what I was doing was really, really big. So if I could kind of make really big things, I could deal with this really big thing. It sounds so like sort of simplistic when I say it, but I think it's that simple, is that was the drive.
And we had a comment from somebody that asked us to stop sharing your screen. So our images are bigger. So maybe we have more presence. It's more conversational.
Sure.
Yeah, I think what you just said has a potential to be really a really interesting topic, for maybe an art historian or something to later, think about your work and think about why the scale in this case. It's so interesting. You're talking about these really intimate pictures of your mom and these little tiny, teeny little notes. And then you have this drive to go as big as you can and get your washing machine, to almost break so you can make the biggest thing possible. There's something there, which you, of course, aptly and clearly describe, but I think is complex and is an interest. It's a great question.
Yeah, it is. It's complex for me too, because at the same time, I'm a quiet introvert. Like, oh my gosh, I'm taking these small private things and making them huge. Well, how did that happen? So there is this like ongoing kind of query about, okay. And that's in the space where my work is pulling me forward. Like I am sort of a better person in the studio in terms of striving and being open to things I don't know and honoring what it's about. And if I want to put it in the world, then, and asking myself questions I wouldn't otherwise ask.
Yeah, that's illuminating. And I think there's another question that came into the chat, and it says, say more about your influence of aliens, but I want to frame that question. I think it's a really good question, but I'm going to frame it based on some of the conversation we had prior to going live. I think we talked a little bit about the circumstances around Betty actually passing. And, it was in late 2020, December 1st, 2020, right? So it was during COVID, and you were sharing that you were, it was like a surreal, I'll take the liberty of saying, and please correct me, a little bit of an alien kind of experience, being like almost sci-fi or, dystopic, traumatic in a, kind of experience. So connecting that to your talk, and you're talking about this kind of I think you mentioned this kind of alien-like monster relating to the hand. I don't know, maybe might there be a connection there for you, or I know that's a little tender and hard, but or not.
There definitely, I mean, there definitely is. And I have actually long been, I'm a sci-fi fan, otherworldly things, the dystopian futures, and all of the sort of terror or amusement that can go with that. And again, I think it's sort of in the same wheelhouse as the issue of scale, is that the processing the reality of the experience with my mother, really, like, I didn't have a place to park it, but were things that were otherworldly.
Yeah.
And then to have that really, and I think that, death is hard for everyone, right? This is a hard, otherworldly space, big questions about life and mortality. And then you layer on top of that COVID, where you're donning your gear and have your masks, and there's this other layer of separation and behaviors and temperature checks and, global fear that, what's real, right? And then with my mother's dementia, what's real? Like, this is real. So that sort of like switchback space of, this is real. This isn't some otherworldly experience. You are here now. This is what's actually happening. And your mind going, no, that's not possible. This is not possible. So it plays into that.
Yeah. There's this theme, I feel like, that's emerging a little bit in this conversation. And thanks so much to participants for all these great questions. I hope there'll be more. Thank you. I feel like there's a thread. Sorry, I'm gonna stop saying that. There is a theme emerging here that's kind of about that we talked about in terms of scale and now aliens, or really just the kind of dystopian reality, or the kind of defamiliarization that we experience with something like COVID. Like, suddenly everything that was familiar is just strange. And
and at the same time, right, I am somebody who feels that there's great power and value in experiences that decenter, that throw you off, that with everything else going on, right, that make you question your assumptions and make you question your embedded experiences and how they're impacting the choices you're making. So again, like this switchback of, oh, right, so you're all for experiences that decenter you, except when it's really messing with your head. It's like, no, that's actually what needs to be done, right? And I need to take that in, and we all need to take in being decentered. So there's that, right? It's a tough space.
Yeah, it's like, it goes back to, the theme I was going to say is like processing, right? It's like going back to this, like what you just said. It's like, how do you grapple with and process all these really difficult and complex experiences? And, for you, it's making these monumentally scaled rugs with these strange alien-like hands that have this completely beautiful and strange texture. And they're very thin, by the way. I hope you'll be able to see the show, but if you don't make it, they're very, right? They're like that. So they're delicate and pliable. They drape. They're also no rug is very square, but they're very uneven in a way that feels not incidental, but definitely evoking the fluidity of memory and relationship and textile and emotion, those contingencies, as well as processing, the delicacy and fluidity of processing itself. Oh, great. Another question is, Uh, oh, this is a good technical question. Do you ever use needles and hooks for an entire piece, or did you start that way? So Carla is asking, basically about your technique. So maybe you could just go back and remind us about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have done work knitting by hand, crocheting by hand, embroidering by hand, and I, this is sort of also part of this. Like, no matter what I'm doing, I end up making it sort of complicated and highly processing. So I'd been doing lots of work by hand and started to have carpal tunnel from, for the knitters out there and the crocheters, you do this a million times and you end up having carpal tunnel. And that's when I decided to embrace using a knitting machine. But then I get a knitting machine and then I start making huge things that still require tons of handwork. And I do, and that's something that I have been doing since I finished this body of work, is I have been giving myself a space in the studio to experiment and make small things and do sketches and textiles using hand techniques and just doing some open exploration.
Great. I hadn't been familiar with knitting machines before I encountered your work, and I had to learn about that. So I wanted to, a while back I said I wanted to bring up an idea, and I think I'll bring it up now, which is that I've been thinking about, and we've talked about this a little bit, I've been thinking about how a theme emerges in this body of work that is about the entanglements of mother and child, or I'll say father and child as well. Or maybe I'll say parent and child. There's an entanglement between parent and child. You have these works that are mother and child night, and we've talked about the ways in which caring for your mother, there's a kind of role switch, as it were, but back and forth, right? Your daughter become parent, become daughter, become parent, become daughter. And I guess I just wanted to open a discussion on that, because I think there's something interesting about parenting, caring for something, stewarding something. It's a kind of creative act in a way. There's something about parenting and being an artist that are related. I've been thinking a lot about that. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that this is part of making the work, but also how being an artist really does inform how I live my life, right? It's like to be open, to listen to the work, to see the work, to give myself time to understand what I can understand and be okay with what I can't, but to continue to go forward. These are all lessons that are born of my studio practice, right? And they just are for me. And I am a parent. And I think that my sons would attest to recognizing what I'm saying as how I parent, right? And that my relationship with my mother was challenging, and the practices in my studio helped me with that, to have that be what the best it could be, and so that all those things associated with creativity and like, wow, what just happened? Or why am I compelled by this image? Or why did you just say that? Like that sort of space of being open and taking something in and trying to respond thoughtfully. So it's not a passive place at all, because you're making. This is a doing thing. Being an artist is a doing. It's not just a passive receiving space. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I really agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've even been thinking about being an art historian as a kind of, parenting is a weird word, because sometimes people construe it to mean a kind of hierarchical thing. I don't take it that way at all. I learn from just as much, if not more, from my children than I think they learn from me. It's really kind of about a reciprocity. it's like gardening or something. There's a way in which you learn from the plants as much as they get from you. And parenting is so, I'm a parent, it's so hard, you know, and also it's the greatest, most educational thing ever. So I think parenting oneself through one's art, parenting one's viewer through one's art are all worthy topics. And that's something that really struck me about Mother and Child Night and Mother and Child Day, to have this, you know, this silhouette of this child right in the center of these rugs. And, you know, in a way they become a corollary for the viewer. They're kind of at head height. And in a sense, by seeing this, by encountering that silhouette, we enter it or become it, and also become its parent because we're its viewer. It's an interesting, anyways, compositional device or something, not to reduce it to an apparatus, like some kind of
no, but it is, right?
Yeah.
No, and I think that, I mean, those things for me are, right, it is a device, and as is, you know, I think that part of my, I mean, I have a love of art history and referencing, you know, it fits the theme of this work to reference sort of favorite old paintings and stuff. And there's other layers that go in there. But there is that part where, you know, the formal elements become, they are my devices, right? It is, and the work is abstraction, and it's not, but that it, you know, I like to think of it, what I'm trying to do with the work would be like fiction, in a way, fictionalizing life. Like it all is what it is, but it's also sort of building more like characters around that, so that the viewer can identify with that silhouette. That silhouette doesn't stay me. Like I don't want the work to be me, this is my experience. I'm not putting the work out there to be made to feel better. I'm putting the work out there to hopefully that, you know, people can engage in it and find things in it. Because I learned a lot from making it.
Yeah, wow, that's really helpful. I think it's like, there's something about how processing the world as an artist, you know, parenting your mother, parenting yourself, parenting your children, parenting your rugs, you know, you give everyone so much with that as well. Like you help us to see. You know, you mentioned Fra Angelico, which comes to mind. This, like I think you referenced the Palazzo San Marco or something, right? And you know, those figures in Fra Angelico are also so, in a way, parented. They're like so much about their strangeness and yet their grace. Like each of these figures is a little too elongated, or their arms are in the wrong place or something, or whatever, but they're kneeling, but they're standing, but because their torso is too big. But in any case, when you see them there, it's like, it has that same thing as the silhouette in Mother and Child Night. Like you care for them in a way, you know?
Right. And there is this sort of otherworldly strangeness to so much of that, right, early Renaissance work, where there's the one painting, I think it's the Mocking of Christ, that's like up near the ceiling. Like, what the heck? Like there's a fresco up near a ceiling. That's amazing. And it was done so long ago. So it's like, go back in time to ideas that feel so contemporary and valuable, and that's how, right, I feel is like with the eye portals, is that like things are just coming in from an unexpected place. Like, why did Fra Angelico do a painting near the ceiling, like in the corner of his cell? Like that's just fascinates me. And at the same time, it feels so much like my experience in this sort of, which I really like what you say, that grace, the challenge and the grace, the oddity and the grace, that there's this sort of beauty in that space.
Yeah, I so agree. I feel like there's a way in which so much great Renaissance art. I didn't anticipate this conversation would go this way, but I think it's actually really so relevant. This so much Renaissance, great art from the Renaissance is about, or I shouldn't say great, but so anyways, so much Renaissance art is about, like for Angelico, is about this strangeness of the world, right? You're just like born into this magical place, and then there's just death, there are plagues all around you. There's, it's not unlike our time. It's not
exactly right.
Yeah. Your mother, going through what she went through and dying during COVID and being in hazmat suits and pandemics, and that was a long time ago, but art can show us that actually a long time ago is not such a long time ago, right? We're all humans and we experience these things, and they're hard to process. So, but your work helps us to do that, and is so profound. And I guess we're kind of coming to the closing of the hour, and just want to open it up for any last technical or otherwise questions. We've had really awesome questions. So, did I miss anything? Oh, well, this is a nice question. It's just a question about any topics that you've covered in the past. What kind of work? There's two questions about this, actually. So I'm so sorry. I missed three questions, but two are the same question. So really two questions. One is, will grief continue to impact your work? And I think we kind of discussed that. That's also a good question. But these other two questions are the same. They're basically, what are the topics that you addressed in your work previous to this body of work about your mom? And how did what is the genealogy of your work, basically, and how does it lead up to this?
So in my previous work, I have worked on, I would say themes would be kind of nature, environmental themes. I've always used images. So I started out as a painter and then transitioned to textiles, and so I've always used sort of images for storytelling. I did do a series of pieces that was using images out of newspapers, international newspapers that were laid into pieces where I would resituate an image into another context through textiles. Was a series of work. I've also did a series of pieces that was using pins about like the body, skin, and kind of ideas about the inside of like prickly experiences. So they're using like bug pins that would reference nature to create these kind of skins that almost look like fur, but then when you got up close to it, it was like, oh, that's not fur. So I've always been really, no matter what it is, there's an aspect of the work that is how it's like, oh, when you get close to it, you have a haptic, visceral response to some surprise about the material.
Interesting.
Yeah,
thank you for those great questions. I'm so glad I didn't miss that in the chat box. That's really interesting. It's consonant with what you're doing in this show as well. The tactility as a way to evoke feelings and response from the viewer in various ways. And no, they're not devices. They're complex ways. It's aesthetics. They're complex, poetic ways of engaging our thoughts and your thoughts, so that your art helps us to think together and to feel with you. And so thank you for that. And thank you for your exhibition at the Hunterdon, which is wonderful. And again, I encourage everybody to see it up through June 13th.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Anne. Good night, everybody.
Good night.